In the fading light of a late summer evening in 1903, the industrial hum of Detroit, Michigan, forms a steady backdrop. Inside a modest clapboard house, a newborn's cry cuts through the warm air. This child, Ralph Johnson Bunche, enters a world on the cusp of profound change. His father, Fred, a barber, and his mother, Olive, a devoted homemaker, could scarcely imagine that their son would one day stand among the world's most revered peacemakers. The Bunche household, though constrained by the era's racial barriers, is filled with a quiet dignity and an unspoken belief in the power of education. Family photographs, carefully arranged on a mantelpiece, catch the last rays of sun, hinting at a lineage of resilience. This is a story not of sudden fame, but of a foundation laid brick by brick in the ordinary rhythms of daily life. When Ralph is just 10 years old, his family's journey takes a westward turn. Seeking a healthier climate for his mother and the promise of a new beginning, they relocate to Los Angeles, California. The move is a jarring shift from the dense, urban Midwest to the sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of the West Coast. Here, the family settles into a small bungalow surrounded by citrus trees, their fragrance a constant, gentle presence. But tragedy soon reshapes Ralph's world. Within a few short years, both his mother and father pass away, leaving Ralph and his younger sister in the care of their maternal grandmother, Lucy Taylor Johnson. This formidable woman, known to all as Nana, becomes the unwavering pillar of his life. Born into slavery in Texas, Nana carries an unbreakable spirit and a fierce conviction that education is the only true path to freedom. Her stories, told in the soft glow of a kerosene lamp, are not of bitterness, but of perseverance and the absolute necessity of self-respect. In their simple home, she creates an atmosphere of high expectations, where every book is a treasure and every lesson a step toward a larger purpose. Under Nana's watchful eye, Ralph thrives. He is a boy of boundless energy and sharp intellect, delivering newspapers before dawn and working odd jobs to help support the household. The streets of Los Angeles become his classroom, a vibrant, multicultural tapestry that shapes his understanding of the world beyond the confines of textbooks. At Jefferson High School, his natural academic gifts begin to shine. He excels not only in his studies, but also in debate, where he learns to wield words with precision and grace. His voice, calm yet persuasive, carries a maturity that sets him apart. The school's modest auditorium, with its creaking wooden floors and heavy velvet curtains, witnesses his first triumphs in articulating complex ideas. His teachers, recognizing a rare talent, encourage him to aim higher than he ever thought possible. For a young black man in the 1920s, the path to college is steep, but Ralph climbs it with quiet determination, his grandmother's words echoing in his mind, "You're as good as anyone and better than most." With a scholarship in hand, Ralph enters the University of California, Los Angeles, a burgeoning campus set against the backdrop of the Santa Monica Mountains. The architecture is a blend of Italian Romanesque, its red-tiled roofs and arched colonnades bathed in the golden California light. Here, Bunche is a standout student, majoring in international relations and graduating summa cum laude in 1927. He is a familiar figure on the sun-dappled pathways, often seen deep in conversation with classmates, his hands animated as he discusses the pressing issues of the day. His time at UCLA is not merely an academic exercise, it is a formative period where his moral compass is calibrated. He develops a keen interest in the plight of colonized peoples, seeing clear parallels between their struggles and the racial injustices at home. The university library, a grand, light-filled space with towering shelves, becomes his sanctuary. There, surrounded by the scent of old paper and polished wood, he begins to formulate the questions that will drive his life's work. Why does one group dominate another? And how can a just peace be built? Bunche's intellectual journey takes him next to Harvard University, a world away from the sunny optimism of UCLA. The ivy-covered brick halls of Cambridge, Massachusetts, are steeped in tradition and privilege, a stark contrast to the humble bungalows of his youth. The air is crisp, and the autumn leaves crunch underfoot as he walks to Widener Library, its imposing columns a symbol of the academic heights he is determined to scale. At Harvard, he earns his master's degree and then sets his sights on a doctorate in political science. His dissertation topic is bold and unprecedented, a comparative study of colonial administration in Africa. To conduct his research, he travels extensively, crisscrossing the continent to observe firsthand the machinery of colonial rule. He sees the dusty administrative offices, the bustling marketplaces, and the quiet dignity of local leaders navigating an imposed system. This is not a detached, theoretical study. It is an immersive, human experience that deepens his empathy and sharpens his critique. In 1934, he defends his dissertation, becoming the first African American to earn a PhD in political science from Harvard. The achievement is monumental, a quiet but seismic crack in the edifice of academic segregation. In a small, wood-paneled seminar room, under the gaze of esteemed professors, his calm, rigorous defense marks not an end, but a beginning. The boy from Detroit, guided by his grandmother's unyielding light, has become a scholar of the world, armed with the tools to dismantle the very systems he has studied. The morning light of the late 1930s filters through the tall windows of a Howard University office, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Ralph Bunche, now a young professor, is already at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and well-worn books on race and colonialism. The room is a sanctuary of thought, its walls lined with maps of Africa and the American South, two regions he sees as twin battlegrounds in a global struggle for human dignity. Here, in the heart of Washington, D.C., Bunche channels his Harvard training into action. He founds the Political Science Department at Howard, a beacon of Black intellectual life, and tirelessly mentors a generation of students. His lectures are not dry recitations but passionate, data-driven arguments that connect the dots between colonial exploitation abroad and racial segregation at home. The chalk dust on his sleeves is a badge of honor, a sign of his commitment to building a more just world, one mind at a time. Bunche's scholarly rigor soon catches the attention of the broader academic world. In 1938, he is invited to join a monumental research project led by the Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal. The task is to conduct a comprehensive study of race relations in the United States, a work that will become the landmark book, An American Dilemma. For Bunche, this is a chance to apply his analytical skills on a grand scale. He travels extensively across the Jim Crow South, a journey that is both physically exhausting and emotionally searing. In a dusty, sun-baked town, he might sit on the porch of a sharecropper's shack, listening to stories of hardship and resilience, his notepad filling with meticulous observations. In a segregated library, he pores over local records, documenting the systematic disenfranchisement of Black voters. His memos for the project are massive, detailed, and unflinching, laying bare the brutal contradictions of American democracy. The work is a crucible, forging his understanding of how deeply racism is embedded in social and economic structures, and it solidifies his belief that peaceful, structural change is both necessary and possible. The rumble of war in Europe and Asia in the early 1940s pulls Bunche from the quiet halls of academia and into the urgent machinery of government. The world is on fire, and the United States is slowly awakening to its global responsibilities. Bunche's expertise on colonial territories and race relations is suddenly of vital strategic importance. He is recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA, to analyze political conditions in Africa and other colonial regions. His workplace shifts from a sunlit university office to a secure, fluorescent-lit government building in Washington, where maps are marked with pins and the air hums with the tension of global conflict. Bunche's role is to assess how the war is reshaping colonial dynamics and to provide intelligence that could influence Allied strategy. He works with a quiet intensity, translating complex field reports into clear, actionable briefings. This is a new kind of classroom, where the stakes are life and death, and where his ideas about self-determination begin to have real-world implications. His effectiveness in the OSS leads to a historic appointment at the State Department in 1944. Ralph Bunche becomes the first Black American to hold a desk officer position, a role that places him at the very center of planning for the post-war world. The State Department building, with its grand marble corridors and echoing footsteps, is a world of tradition and protocol, yet Bunche navigates it with his characteristic dignity and sharp intellect. He is assigned to the Division of Dependent Area Affairs, a perfect fit for his lifelong expertise. His primary focus is drafting policy for the territories and colonies that will be affected by the war's end. Late into the night, the light in his office burns as he writes position papers, arguing for a new international system of trusteeship that would guide colonies toward independence. The clatter of his typewriter is a steady rhythm of progress, each page a step toward dismantling old empires and building a new framework for global governance. Bunche's most enduring contribution during this period is his integral role in planning the United Nations. He is part of the small, dedicated team that drafts the foundational documents for what will become the UN Charter. In the spring of 1945, he travels to San Francisco as a key advisor to the U.S. delegation for the United Nations Conference on International Organization. The city is alive with hope and anticipation, its streets filled with delegates from 50 nations. Inside the Grand Opera House, where the conference is held, the atmosphere is electric with the possibility of lasting peace. Bunche works tirelessly behind the scenes, his expertise on colonial issues proving indispensable. He helps negotiate the language of what will become Chapters 11 and 12 of the Charter, dealing with non-self-governing territories and the trusteeship system. In quiet, smoke-filled meeting rooms, he drafts text, mediates between competing national interests, and patiently explains the necessity of a system that balances great power realities with the aspirations of dependent peoples. His work is not about grandstanding. It is about the meticulous, often tedious, construction of a legal and moral framework. The signing of the Charter on June 26, 1945, is a moment of profound achievement. As the delegates applaud, Bunche stands among them, a quiet architect of a new world order. His journey from the segregated streets of Los Angeles to the birthplace of the UN a testament to the power of principled scholarship and unwavering dedication. The spring of 1945 brought a crisp breeze off the Pacific, carrying the scent of salt and eucalyptus through the streets of San Francisco. Inside the Grand War Memorial Opera House, a hum of anticipation filled the air as delegates from 50 nations gathered to shape a new world order. Among them was a modest, bespectacled man in a well-worn suit, Dr. Ralph Bunche, the first African-American to hold a key position in the United States delegation. He walked the corridors with a quiet determination, his briefcase stuffed with papers on colonialism and self-determination, ideas that had simmered in his mind since his doctoral studies at Harvard. The ornate chandeliers above cast a warm glow on the polished wood and red velvet seats, but Bunche's focus was elsewhere, on the voices of the colonized peoples who had no seat at this table. He understood that the lofty promises of the Atlantic Charter, with its talk of self-government, would ring hollow without concrete mechanisms. As the conference opened, Bunche was assigned to the committee dealing with trusteeship and non-self-governing territories, a seemingly technical area that he knew was the very heart of the future peace. In the hushed committee rooms, where sunlight streamed through tall windows, he began to draft the language that would become Chapters 11 and 12 of the United Nations Charter, a quiet revolution in international law. The work was meticulous and often exhausting. Each morning, Bunche would rise early in his modest hotel room, the fog still clinging to the Golden Gate, and review the previous day's compromises. He worked closely with other advisors, but his expertise was unmatched. He had literally written the book on colonial administration for the U.S. government. In the committee sessions, held in stuffy conference rooms with green baize tables and ashtrays overflowing, Bunche spoke with a calm, measured tone that belied his radical vision. He argued that the Charter must include a declaration regarding non-self-governing territories, obligating colonial powers to promote the well-being of inhabitants and develop self-government. This was not merely a suggestion, but a binding international responsibility. The European colonial powers, particularly Britain and France, resisted any language that hinted at independence or outside interference. Bunche, however, skillfully navigated these tensions, framing the provisions as a practical path to stability and a moral imperative. He would often stay late into the night, under the green glass lamps of the drafting room, refining phrases with a pencil, his only company the distant sound of foghorns. His colleagues noticed his unwavering patience. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did interject, it was to find common ground. This was the art of diplomacy he was perfecting, not grandstanding, but the slow, deliberate construction of consensus. Chapter 11, the Declaration regarding non-self-governing territories, emerged as a landmark. It stated that members administering such territories accept the obligation to ensure the political, economic, social, and educational advancement of their inhabitants, to develop self-government, and to transmit regular information to the Secretary-General. This last point, the reporting requirement, was Bunche's subtle but crucial lever for accountability. It meant the colonial powers would have to publicly account for their stewardship, shining a light into the darkest corners of empire. In the cavernous committee hall, with its high ceiling and murals depicting human progress, Bunche watched as the delegates voted to adopt the text. He felt a profound sense of achievement, but also a pang of realism. He knew these words would only be as powerful as the will to enforce them. Still, for the first time in history, an international treaty explicitly recognized the rights of colonized peoples and established a framework for their progress towards self-rule. It was a direct challenge to the notion that any people were inherently unfit to govern themselves, a notion Bunche had spent his entire academic career dismantling. The light through the windows had shifted from morning gold to afternoon amber by the time the gavel fell, and Bunche allowed himself a small, tired smile. The trusteeship system, outlined in Chapter 12, was even more innovative. It built upon the League of Nations mandate system, but infused it with a new spirit of international supervision. Bunche helped design a structure where trust territories would be administered by a state under the watchful eye of a trusteeship council, with the ultimate goal of self-government or independence. He insisted on provisions for periodic visits and the right of inhabitants to petition the United Nations directly. This was a radical departure from the old imperial order, where subject peoples had no voice. In the back rooms of the Opera House, where the smell of coffee and tobacco mingled, Bunche debated fiercely with representatives who wanted to water down the system. He argued that the credibility of the entire UN depended on its commitment to those without power. His own experiences with racial discrimination in America gave him a visceral understanding of what it meant to be voiceless. He knew that the color of his skin made some of his European counterparts dismissive, but he used their underestimation as a shield, working diligently behind the scenes to build alliances with Latin American and Asian delegates who shared his vision. The final text of the Charter, signed on June 26, 1945, in the Grand Auditorium, bore the unmistakable imprint of Ralph Bunche's intellect and moral clarity. As the pen scratched across the parchment and the flashbulbs popped, he stood not in the spotlight, but off to the side, a quiet architect of a more just world. Bunche's contribution extended beyond the legal text. He helped establish a normative framework that would fuel decolonization for decades. The principles he embedded in the Charter became the rallying cry for independence movements from Africa to Asia. He envisioned a world where sovereignty was not a privilege of the powerful, but a right of all peoples. Yet, he was acutely aware of the limitations. The Charter did not immediately dismantle empires, and the Trusteeship Council would later face criticism for its slow pace. Bunche himself knew that the real struggle would be in the implementation, in the messy, often violent process of turning words into reality. But he had given the international community a standard to aspire to, a legal and moral yardstick. Walking out of the Opera House into the cool San Francisco evening, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening bay, Bunche felt the weight of what had been accomplished. He had not single-handedly ended colonialism, but he had helped build the tools for its eventual demise. His work in San Francisco was not about personal glory, it was about laying a foundation. And as he looked toward the horizon, where the last light of day met the sea, he understood that the true test of that foundation would come in the years ahead, in the conflicts and negotiations that would demand every ounce of his skill and patience. The Mediterranean sun spilled through the tall windows of the Hotel de Roses on the island of Rhodes, casting long amber rectangles across the tiled floor. It was January 1949, and the air outside was cool and salt-tinged, a gentle breeze stirring the olive trees that dotted the hillside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension and exhaustion. Ralph Bunche sat at the head of a long wooden table, his posture calm but his eyes sharp, as delegates from Israel and Egypt faced each other for yet another round of talks. The assassination of Count Folke Bernadotte 4 months earlier had thrust Bunche into the role of acting United Nations mediator, a position that seemed almost impossible. He had inherited a conflict that had already claimed thousands of lives, and the world watched with bated breath to see if this quiet, methodical American could succeed where others had failed. Bunche approached the negotiations not with grand speeches, but with a patient, almost scholarly persistence. He understood that the formal conference room was only one part of the process. In the corridors and over shared meals, he worked to build personal relationships with the delegates, listening to their grievances and gently guiding them toward common ground. Each day began with a brisk walk along the rocky shoreline, where Bunche would gather his thoughts before the sessions. The hotel itself became a microcosm of the conflict, with Israeli and Arab delegations housed on separate floors, their meals served in different dining rooms. Bunche moved between these worlds with quiet determination, his modest suite becoming a neutral space where he would draft proposal after proposal by lamplight, often working late into the night while the sea murmured outside his window. The negotiations were a delicate dance of incremental progress. Bunche insisted on dealing with one issue at a time, starting with the exchange of prisoners and gradually moving to the more contentious question of troop withdrawals. He refused to let the talks collapse, even when delegates stormed out or threatened to leave the island entirely. His secret, he later said, was never to ask for a final yes too soon. Instead, he would seek agreement on small points, building a foundation of trust that could support the weight of larger compromises. The physical setting of Rhodes, with its ancient crusader fortress and quiet harbors, seemed to encourage a slower, more reflective pace. Bunche used this to his advantage, organizing informal gatherings in the hotel garden, where the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of church bells softened the edges of political intransigence. As winter turned to spring, the talks stretched into weeks, then months. Bunche's health suffered under the strain. He lost weight and slept poorly, but his resolve never wavered. He was acutely aware of the human cost of delay, and this knowledge fueled his perseverance. Finally, on February 24, 1949, after nearly 6 weeks of painstaking negotiation, the Israel-Egypt Armistice Agreement was signed in the hotel's main conference room. It was a moment of quiet triumph, marked not by celebration, but by a collective exhale of relief. Bunche stood to the side, his face drawn but satisfied, as the documents were exchanged. This was only the first of 4 agreements he would broker, with Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria following in the months ahead, each one a testament to his unwavering belief that even the deepest divides could be bridged through dialogue. Bunche's success on Rhodes transformed him from a behind-the-scenes diplomat into an international symbol of peace. When the Nobel Committee announced in 1950 that he would receive the Peace Prize, he initially hesitated to accept, feeling that the honor should belong to the United Nations as a whole. Yet his achievement was deeply personal. He had navigated not only the complexities of Middle Eastern politics, but also the undercurrents of racial prejudice that still pervaded the diplomatic world. As an African American, his authority was sometimes questioned in private, but his competence and integrity silenced doubt. The award ceremony in Oslo was a dignified affair, and Bunche used his acceptance speech to emphasize that peace was not a static condition, but a continuous process requiring constant effort and mutual respect. In the end, The Rhodes armistices did not bring a permanent peace to the region, a limitation that Bunche himself acknowledged with characteristic honesty. The agreements were military ceasefires, not political settlements, and they left many fundamental issues unresolved. Yet they halted the immediate bloodshed and created a framework that, for a time, prevented a wider war. Bunche's legacy from those months on the island is not one of naive idealism, but of practical, determined diplomacy. He showed that, even in the midst of profound animosity, it is possible to find a path forward if one is willing to listen, to persist, and to treat every party with dignity. The light that fell across that table in Rhodes was the light of a hard-won, imperfect peace, and it still offers a lesson in the patient art of making the impossible possible. The sun rises over the Congo River, casting a golden sheen on the dense equatorial forest. In the early 1960s, this land of immense natural wealth is a cauldron of post-colonial tension. Ralph Bunche arrives in Leopoldville, a city of broad boulevards and colonial-era buildings now charged with uncertainty. He walks through the quiet corridors of the UN headquarters, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The air is thick with the scent of tropical rain and the weight of a nation's fragile independence. Bunche, now a seasoned diplomat, carries a calm authority, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos. He knows that peace here requires more than ceasefires. It demands building institutions from the ground up, a task he approaches with methodical patience. In the Congo, Bunche serves as the UN's special representative, orchestrating one of the organization's most complex peacekeeping missions. He works tirelessly in a modest office, surrounded by maps and reports, his desk lamp burning late into the night. The mission's goal is to prevent the country from fracturing entirely, a challenge that involves disarming militias, protecting civilians, and navigating a labyrinth of political rivalries. Bunche's approach is rooted in his academic understanding of colonialism's scars and his belief in local self-determination. He focuses on practical steps, securing airports, restoring communication lines, and training local administrators. Despite the immense pressure, he maintains his composure, his voice a measured instrument of reason in heated negotiations. He often reflects that peace is not a dramatic event, but a slow, deliberate construction, much like the drafting of the UN Charter years before. Years later, Bunche turns his attention to the island of Cyprus, where the azure Mediterranean laps against ancient shores. The conflict between Greek and Turkish Cypriots threatens to ignite a wider regional war. Bunche arrives in Nicosia, a city divided by a green line that snakes through its medieval streets. He walks along the buffer zone, a surreal landscape of abandoned homes and sandbagged positions, the scent of jasmine mixing with the dust of neglect. Here, his role is to mediate and to deploy UN peacekeepers to prevent bloodshed. He shuttles between communities, listening to grievances in shaded courtyards and stuffy meeting rooms. His patience is legendary. He understands that trust is built in small increments, over countless cups of coffee and shared silences. The Cyprus mission solidifies his reputation as a master of quiet diplomacy, a man who could find common ground where others saw only chasms. Amid these global responsibilities, Bunche carries a personal burden, the fight for civil rights at home. He never marches in the streets, but his influence is profound. In his study, surrounded by books on African liberation and American history, he writes letters and articles supporting Martin Luther King Jr. and the movement. He sees the struggle for racial equality in the United States as inseparable from the decolonization efforts he champions abroad. When the 1963 March on Washington unfolds, Bunche is there, standing among the crowd, his presence a quiet testament to his convictions. He believes that America cannot lead the free world while denying freedom to its own citizens, and he uses his international platform to make that case, subtly but persistently, in diplomatic circles and public addresses. Perhaps the most telling episode of his personal struggle occurs when he is offered a high-ranking position in the State Department, a role that would place him at the pinnacle of American foreign policy. The offer comes with a bitter caveat. He would be expected to live in Washington, D.C., where housing segregation is rampant. Bunche, a man who has negotiated with kings and presidents, refuses. He declines the post, stating plainly that he will not subject his family to the indignity of racial discrimination. This act of principle costs him a historic appointment, but it underscores his unwavering integrity. In a letter to a friend, he writes of the pain of being deemed acceptable to represent his country abroad, but not to live freely within it. The incident reveals the deep contradictions of his era, and Bunche's quiet defiance becomes a powerful statement in itself. As the 1960s give way to the 1970s, Bunche's health begins to fail. The relentless travel, the stress of conflict zones, and the weight of unending crises take their toll. Yet he continues his work, his frame now frailer but his eyes still sharp with purpose. He takes solace in simple routines, tending to his garden, reading by the fireplace, and spending time with his grandchildren. The world outside is turbulent, but he remains a symbol of steady commitment. He retires from the UN in 1971, leaving behind a legacy of peacekeeping innovations and a model of impartial mediation. His final years are spent in relative quiet, reflecting on a life that bridged the aspirations of the oppressed with the machinery of international power. He passes away in 1971, but his blueprint for peace endures, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming forces, one person's principled persistence can reshape the world. The autumn light filters through the tall windows of Ralph Bunche's study in Queens, New York, illuminating dust motes that dance in the still air. It is the early 1970s, and the world has changed dramatically since he first stepped onto the international stage. The room is lined with mementos, a carved African mask, a photo with world leaders, the Nobel medal in its simple case. Bunche sits in a worn leather chair, his health declining, diabetes and heart trouble slowing his once tireless pace. Outside, the leaves turn gold and crimson, a quiet reminder of cycles and endings. He spends his days reading, reflecting on a career that took him from the segregated streets of Los Angeles to the corridors of global power. The phone rings less often now, but his mind remains sharp, filled with memories of negotiations won and lost, of promises kept and broken. In these later years, Bunche grows increasingly disappointed with the United Nations' handling of certain conflicts, particularly the Vietnam War and the persistent stalemate in the Middle East. He had believed so fervently in the UN's potential to be a force for rational, peaceful resolution, yet he witnesses it often paralyzed by Cold War rivalries. In private conversations and unpublished notes, he expresses frustration that the great powers use the organization as a stage for proxy battles rather than a forum for genuine peacemaking. He feels the weight of unfulfilled promise, a sorrow that the machinery he helped build could not always live up to its ideals. Yet he does not become bitter. Instead, he channels his energy into mentoring younger diplomats, urging them to maintain faith in the slow, unglamorous work of mediation. He tells them that peace is a process, not a destination, and that setbacks are not defeats, but lessons. Bunche's health continues to deteriorate, and he resigns from his UN post in 1971. The man who once crisscrossed the globe is now confined to a quieter world of hospitals and home rest. Visitors find him physically diminished, but intellectually vibrant, his eyes still alight when discussing African independence or civil rights. He takes pride in the growing number of African Americans entering diplomacy and public service, seeing in them the continuation of his own journey. He passes away on December 9, 1971, leaving behind a complex legacy. The world mourns a peacemaker, but those close to him remember a man who never forgot the sting of racism, who carried the burden of double consciousness, being both an insider and an outsider in the halls of power. His funeral is a somber affair, attended by dignitaries and ordinary people alike, a testament to the breadth of his impact. Reflecting on his legacy, one must acknowledge both the triumphs and the limitations. Bunche shattered racial barriers, becoming the first African American to win the Nobel Peace Prize and to hold such high UN office. He proved that a black man could be a global statesman, navigating the intricacies of international law and diplomacy with brilliance. His contributions to decolonization and peacekeeping are foundational. The UN trusteeship system and the very concept of impartial mediation bear his imprint. Yet he operated within a system that was often profoundly unjust. He faced constant racial slights, from being denied housing to being overlooked for promotions that his white colleagues received. His refusal of the State Department post was a quiet but powerful indictment of American hypocrisy, and it highlighted the personal costs of his public success. He was a pioneer, but the path he carved was steep and rocky, and he did not always reach the summit he envisioned. The controversies of UN peacekeeping also cast a shadow. The Congo mission, for all its successes in preventing total collapse, was criticized for its heavy-handedness and for becoming entangled in Cold War politics. Bunche himself was aware of the moral ambiguities, the times when the UN's presence could be seen as a new form of intervention rather than pure assistance. He grappled with these dilemmas privately, understanding that peacekeeping was an imperfect tool, often a choice between bad and worse. His legacy, therefore, is not one of unblemished heroism, but of principled pragmatism. He taught us that international cooperation is messy, that institutions are flawed, but that the alternative, abandoning the effort, is far worse. His life is a lesson in perseverance, in the dignity of incremental progress, and in the courage to stand by one's principles even when the world does not reciprocate. Today, Ralph Bunche's name may not be as widely recognized as some of his contemporaries, but his influence endures in every UN peacekeeper's blue helmet, in every negotiation that chooses talk over violence. His portrait hangs in the halls of the United Nations, a reminder of a man who believed that reason could triumph over hatred. In a world still riven by conflict, his story offers not a simple happy ending but a realistic hope that patient, principled effort can bend the arc of history, if only slightly, toward justice. As the evening sun sets over the East River, casting long shadows across the UN headquarters, one can almost imagine him walking those corridors, a quiet, determined figure, still urging us to choose peace.